What, you did or you did not?
No, I didn't like the explanation for Mesiras Nefesh.
Okay, well, we're going to get into this stuff.
Yeah,
Now we're going to get more into the conversation. Okay, so we're here in chapter 4, and we've been talking about Naran and Chai Yechida, the 5 levels of the soul. So you have Naran, which is the 3 levels of the soul that are invested within the body, and those find expression in the emotions and in the intellect. And that's what it means that they're invested. Chaya, which is a transcendent level that's not in the body, that corresponds to will, which is a transcendent kind of faculty. And then there's Yechida. Yechida is the essence of the soul that's bound with God. So even though Chaya and Yechida usually, or often, will divide the 5 levels of the soul into 2 categories. You have Naran, the first levels, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, which are Pnimi, those are invested in the body. And then you have the second category, which is the transcendent Chaya and Yechida. Those are the Makif, the transcendent ones. But here we're angling towards something else, which is that there's a difference between Chaya and Yechida. That in a sense, Yechida is a standalone category. It's not just that they have 3 levels that are invested and 2 levels that are transcendent, but that Chaya and Yechida are fundamentally different. And so in a sense, you can almost divide it, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chaya, the Pnimi, and even the Makif, that first level of Makif, the Makif HaKarev, as we've been talking about and explaining at length, and then the Makif HaRochik, the distant one, the level of Yechida. So, and how does it relate to what we're talking about in this Maimon about Shalom, about peace? So he says that there are different levels of peace. You get different degrees. So you have peace, which is when you completely defeat your enemy. You get into a war, into a battle, and you can overcome the enemy in battle. Then there's a level of peace, which is you didn't use this language obviously, but the sort of the idea of intimidating your enemy, where you don't have to even engage in battle. You know, you show them your might, and they like realize that it's the bad idea to fight. So there's no actual war, but you've silenced your enemy by a show of force. And then there's peace where you don't even have an enemy, where the enemy is a friend, it's not an enemy. That's the ultimate level of peace. So he's saying that these 3 levels of peace that we've been talking about would correspond to Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, the internal. Then there's Chaya, and then there's Yechida. And specifically, how is it in davening? How does it relate to what we're talking about in davening? That in davening we say in the Shema, we say in V'ahavta, that you should love Hashem with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. So with all your heart, that corresponds to the heart, Shnei Yitzirecha, the Gemara says, right? Your evil inclination, your good inclination. How do you get your evil inclination to love God? By investing in it, by engaging it, by talking to it in its language, so that it too comes to appreciate godliness and the goodness of God. Then you have with all your might, with all your soul, that corresponds to the level of Chaya. That's your will, your desire to connect to Hashem is so intense that it overwhelms the level of the desires of the desires that you have that aren't for God. And then there's B'chol Ma'idecha, with all your might, that corresponds to Yechida, to the essence of the soul. So the Rebbe says that this idea of loving God even with all your soul, that the level of Chaya, even though it's beyond rationale, it's beyond reason, it's a desire that's beyond reason, nevertheless, you also have desires beyond reason that are irrational or non-reasonable in unholiness. It's just that this is so overwhelming that it silences it. The ultimate peace is when there is nothing else. And Yechida is the only level of the soul that has no counterpart. Intellect or emotions, you can feel one way, you can love something, you can hate something. I could think this is good, or I could think that it's bad, right? If something is chayiv, something is pater, the 2 extremes. So in intellect and in emotion, you have 2 extremes, you can go both ways. Even in will, I can want one thing, I can want the opposite. But when you're talking about the essence of the soul, the level of Yechida, here there's no counterpart. And we explained this in the last classes, we're not going to rehash it. The point is, the Rebbe now to further explain this idea, why Yechida is fundamentally different and stands alone, as opposed to the other ones, and then ultimately why Yechida is the ultimate form of peace. So when we get into chapter 4 about Mesiras Nefesh. So there's a question that we asked in the last class that's still on the table here, which is, beginning of chapter 4, he says that in Chassidus, it explains that real Mesiras Nefesh, how is it that a Yid has the ability to have Mesiras Nefesh, to give their life for God? That is an expression of the essence of the soul, the level of Yechida. So the Rebbe asks, why is that an expression of Yechida? Mesiras Nefesh, you can have even if you love Hashem. If I love Hashem so much that I'm willing to die for Him. Or I can understand that Hashem is so much greater beyond anything I can comprehend, that I have the desire I have such a desire for Him that I'm even willing to die for Him. So you can have Mesiras Nefesh if you love Hashem, and certainly if you're committed to Hashem even beyond reason. So why is it that in Chassidus it's explained that Mesiris Nefesh is really Yechida? That Mesiris Nefesh is a function of Yechida. In other words, if you wanted to, it would seem like this. So he says like this, that the idea of Mesiris Nefesh, of the first two levels, the idea of I rationally decide to have Mesiris Nefesh, or even beyond rationale, but it's because of my will for God that I have Mesiris Nefesh, there, I make a choice. Right? I make the choice to give my life for God. But from Yechida, there is no choice. We discussed this in the last class, the idea that when we talk about Mesiris Nefesh in Judaism, Yiddish, when Rebbe talks in Tanya, and Perikid Chesed Mesiris Nefesh, when it's discussed elsewhere, the idea that even a Kal Shebekalim is willing to be Moiser Nafshe, that even a Jew who's not very committed, and not very informed, and maybe not so devoted to God, nevertheless gives his life to God. It's not a choice that he makes, but that's an expression of the fact that he can't deny his own self. And his own self, in its essence, is bound with God. So to disconnect from that, he's incapable of doing. So he doesn't choose. So a person could have Mesiris Nefesh. Why? Because he recognizes that God is the ultimate good. And so I'm willing to give my life for God. Or if I have Mesiris Nefesh, I become a hero, I become a martyr. Or if I have Mesiris Nefesh, I'll get a good portion of the world to come. I go straight to heaven. So essentially, you're not giving away anything for God. You're just making a good business deal. I'm going to forfeit something here, a lesser good for a greater good. It's a choice that I make. I can also choose not to. I could maybe choose to be short-sighted and not choose that. That's true. But if I'm choosing it, that's a choice I'm making. But with Yechida, there's no choice. I think we talked a little bit about this in the last class in a way to put it maybe in more modern terms, more relevant, maybe practical terminology. The idea that you can find a Yid, and again, even if it's in the minority, it's true that many people have given their lives because they wanted to be martyrs, because they were, they did it happily with that kind of calculation. There are also people who chose not to give their lives, right? But that's another conversation. The fact that you can even have, even if it was one time in history that there was a person who didn't even believe in God, and yet wasn't able to separate himself from God, that already proves this point. And what would that mean? You have people that died because they were Jewish, no other reason. And they weren't afforded a choice. It wasn't like they were given a choice. They had somebody who came and took their lives without them making a choice. But in that moment of truth, the moment that they realized that they were being killed because they were Jewish, if even one of them didn't regret being Jewish, if even one of them was proud of the fact that they were Jewish, which was, and their Jewishness is the reason that they're being killed. So that, in a sense, is sort of a more practical, I think, explanation how the functionality of this idea of not even making a choice. Why? You don't even know what it means to be Jewish. You spend your whole life running away from your Judaism. Where are you going? You're not even sure there's a God. You're agnostic at best. Maybe you even convince yourself that you're an atheist. Why are you not resentful of that idea that you're Jewish? Why? Because your essence is bound with God. And so that when that truth is exposed, there's nothing else, right? So that's the issue. But ultimately, we ask the question: what's different? Why is it that Yechida, the level of Yechida? You want to try with this? Should we try plugging in with this adapter now? See if it works. Why is it that when we talk about Yechida, or in Chassidus, we talk about Mesiris Nefesh, we say it's Yechida? The difference would be, with Yechida, there is no choice. But with the other levels, there is a choice. But either way, there's still Mesiris Nefesh. It's just a difference in how you get to Mesiris Nefesh, whether you made a choice or not. So then why in Chassidus does it say that real Mesiris Nefesh is only Yechida, not anything else? So the Rebbe explains down like this. We're in the middle of chapter 4 by Vahabir, right in the middle of the paragraph. So Vahabir was explanation is like this. Self-sacrifice that comes from the love of loving Hashem with all your heart, right? The rational, reasonable love, or the love that comes from the beyond reason. Is he This Mesiris Nefesh, a person gets to this because he decides he wants to give his life for God. When we're talking about that what compels him to miscompel is his love of Hashem, the love of B'chol Levavcha, which is Naran, with 3 levels invested in the soul, which is reason that's based on, or will that's based on reason. So, in other words, I come to a conclusion that rationally it makes sense reasonably. This is not on. I don't think it's on. The light is not on. So.
forget what we're doing.
Yeah, so it might be losing the audio there then. Right? It's not on. Yeah, okay, we'll do it now. We have to get to the bottom of that. So there's that, you choose, you say reasonably, rationally, it makes sense for me to give my life. Or then, the love of Hashem with all your soul, which is, as we explained, that's the level of Chaya, which is Ratan Shalamayim Mitam. You submit to Hashem even beyond reason, even though it maybe doesn't make sense, you don't understand it, but you submit to it. In other words, I'm willing to give my life for this. However, when we're talking about the Mesiris Nefesh self-sacrifice that comes from this love of all your might, which meaning, as we said, which is Yechida, the level of Yechida of the soul. So here, it's not a choice that you make. It's not that you choose to either reasonably or beyond reason. There is no choice. You simply cannot be disconnected from Hashem. This is then the explanation as to why. The answer to why we say Mesiris Nefesh comes from this B'chol Meidecha, meaning from the level of Yechida, because Mesiris Nefesh, it's not just that there's a difference in the way you come about the Mesiris Nefesh, whether it's a choice you make, a conscious choice, right? Even if it's in a split second, but it's I choose it, or if it wasn't a choice. Because the real Mesiris Nefesh is Bittul. Now, Bittul is one of the most misunderstood concepts of Chassidus. It's a very common, it's a topic that's discussed a lot, and it's one of the most misunderstood concepts. How do you translate the word Bittul in English? Nullification, self-nullification, which, what does that mean in English? No, how many times a year do you use the word nullification? Just when you're on Erev Pesach, right? The Chametz is nullifying. It's like a term that seems like, so here we're going to put it in more relatable terms. So bittul is self-nullification, right? The Pamit is in your bittul, who kisham Mesiris Nefesh, he learned it's at the rotzin, mitzias shaloi, al mitzad alikus. Real bittul, when we talk about bittul, what's bittul? It's when it's not something that comes from me, but it's something that comes from God. What does this mean? Here the Rebbe already is giving us an explanation in the concept of bittul. When somebody says you have to be batul, what does that mean? What does that mean? Put it in relevant, make it personal. What does it mean that you have to be batul? Somebody says you have a lack, you're showing a lack of bittul. What are they trying to say to you? And how are you supposed to fix it? What's wrong with it, and how are you supposed to fix it? So when we translate bittul, we translate self-nullifications. We already ruined the whole thing with the translation. Because the translation of bittul as self-nullification starts with, what's the first word in the translation? Self. So already there's no bittul. What bittul means in Chassidus is that it's not about me. Bittul means it's about something other than me. So it's not about I have to nullify myself. I am nullified, I'm not nullified, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm this, I'm that. Once I enter into the picture, then it's already no longer bittul. So bittul is not about putting yourself down and saying I'm not so great, or I have work to do, I have to be improved. Bittul means I'm thinking of something other than myself. When we say that what's required now is bittul, means that we need to be mindful of something other than ourselves. And again, be mindful of something else. Right? Don't even finish the sentence of find something other than yourself. There's no self. So it's not that myself is a nothing, or low, or insignificant. It's not about me. So if you have a conversation with somebody who wants to tell you about a bad experience, and I had a bad day today. And they start telling you about, a place they were coming down Collins, and there was traffic, and they were stuck, and they were late to a fair, right? And it was so hard. So what do you say? What do you say? Why are they saying that to you, first of all? And how do you respond? Somebody comes to you and tells you, man, so you know what you say? Oh, I remember once I was driving, and I was coming from the other direction, and we had even more traffic, or less traffic. What's the problem? that shows a lack of bittul. What does that mean? Somebody's coming to you and they want to unburden themselves to you. Maybe they want your guidance, and it's possible that you can even help them. And it's possible that you do help them. But you exhibited a lack of bittul. Because you took a conversation that was about them and maybe about yourself. So maybe I'll help you, but the moment, and we can generally be guilty of that, because Sometimes it's innocent. Sometimes we just, in order to help somebody, we need to find it relatable to ourselves. You need to find within yourself something like that to be able to. You say, you sat in traffic and you're frustrated. Well, I have to think about when I was in traffic and how I dealt with that frustration. Okay, fine. But the point is that when we first bring ourselves into that conversation, that's a lack of bittul. Bittul means to make space for somebody else. That's what bittul means. And how do you make space for somebody else? Not by moving yourself on the side, by simply being there for them, by thinking about them. If I'm focused on you and your issue, I'm not thinking about myself. The moment I have to start working on removing myself from the conversation, then I'm caught up in myself again. So even though I'm working on getting myself out of it so I can, but I'm still wrapped up in myself. That's what bittul means. So bittul again is not about a lower self-esteem, and it's not about thinking that it's about thinking about something else. Which, by the way, is the ultimate. It's a liberating concept, because so often we're prevented or afraid to engage in things because we are mindful of our own limitations. I can't do that. You need something has to get done. I'm not capable of doing it. If I had bittul, what would I think? Not, what's the difference if I can or can't? Nobody likes me anyway. I might as well try and see. I'm a failure anyway. I fail at this too, so I'll give it a try. Bittul means something has to get done. I can do it. I'm not thinking about myself. This has to get done. And the same is true when we're talking about bittul to Hashem. What does that mean? Bittul to Hashem doesn't mean I'm nothing compared to Hashem. Bittul means think about Hashem. Think about the Eibusher. Think about Him and not about yourself. Right? So that's already, this is an explanation that comes out in these few lines here. And this is what Mesiras Nefesh is all about. Mesiras Nefesh means it's not about me. So if I come to a decision that it's in my best interest, either because I'm going to benefit from it or because I want to be altruistic and not benefit from it, once I'm making the choices, then the Mesiras Nefesh is an expression of myself. Either of my understanding or of my will, but it's about me. To an extent. Obviously, I'm not going to disparage anybody who gives their life for it. It's a very high level. But still, it's something that's about me. Ultimate Mesiras Nefesh, when we talk about the Yiddish Mesiras Nefesh, is that it's about Him. It's about Hashem. Why do you give your life? Because Hashem. Nothing to do with me. And that is only an expression of B'chol Ma'idecha. That's an expression of Yechid. So the Shleiman, Shezeu Gam Yabiur, B'zeh Shebitol, so now, we're coming back full circle to what we started, what we concluded in chapter 3, about how this idea of completely removing, silencing the foreign desires that we might have in our animal soul comes specifically from B'chol Meidacha. Remember, we said that the main shalom is really from the Ava of B'chol Meidacha, which is from Yechida, not from love of Chai. Why? Because Ki Ava the B'chol Nafshecha, Mekivan Shemitzad Ava Zu Yeshev Shar Shalei Limser Nafshei. If we're looking at it again in the context of Mesiras Nefesh, so the love that we have with all our heart, the love we have with all our soul, since that love is something that is there's a possibility for me to choose one way or choose another way. In other words, I love God with all I love Him so much that I'm willing to give my life for Him. But there's an argument that could be made that, loving somebody so much to die for Him, maybe I should love something else. Fine, so I choose Mesiras Nefesh. But if I'm choosing Mesiras Nefesh, it means that I can also make the opposite choice. And that works in the Ava of B'chol Avavcha and the Ava of B'chol Nafshecha. Both with reason and both beyond reason, I can make an argument one way, I can make an argument the other way. So the fact that I made the argument, I made the right argument, I made the right choice, doesn't eliminate the fact that there's a possibility the opposite way as well. So why am I giving my life? Because of my will? I chose it. Once I'm making a choice, it means that I have two options. If I have two options, it means that there's God and there's another option. But when we talk about Mesiras Nefesh and we say what's Mesiras Nefesh, is that I don't make a choice. There is no choice. There's only God, and so anybody threatening my life or anything like that doesn't have any bearing, doesn't have an effect, because there is only God. So here there are no choices. It's not that I'm choosing, there is no choice. Right? So a person there's a mitzvah that you have now. You have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. So right away, I have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, but also I'm in a big rush. Maybe somebody else I can start making 1,000,001 arguments to why maybe I shouldn't do the mitzvah now. Right? So even if you choose to do the mitzvah, the fact is that your choice is being made in a situation where you have two competing realities. There's God who says do this mitzvah, and then there's the world that says, or your animal soul that says do something else. Right? So I chose God. Okay, so you made the right choice. But you're still making a choice. There's God and there's the counterpart. There's holy and there's the counter to holy. Right? There's the godly soul, there's the animal soul. But when I see a mitzvah in front of me and there is no choice, right? You think about for somebody who keeps Shabbos, right? And you have an opportunity this Shabbos that if you violate Shabbos, you'll make $1 million. Is that a choice you make? I'm going to choose to not violate Shabbos. There are mitzvahs that we have. I mean, obviously, it's a much lesser. It's not the greatest, truest form of it, the most pure form, but it gives us a little insight into it. No, you don't choose to break. You don't choose to not break Shabbos and lose that opportunity. It's Shabbos. There's no question. It's not like there was a choice in the matter. It's Shabbos and that's it. There's no conversation to be had. Not entertaining the thought. But whenever we have that situation where, I could do this, I could do that. So already there's something, there's a counterpart, the unholy, that gives us, that causes us to have a choice. But when we're talking about shalom, peace, right? What's the ultimate peace when there is nothing else? So even the level of chaya, even that level where there's a great desire for God, and that desire is so overwhelming that it silences my other desire to go in the other direction. Nevertheless, that fact that I've silenced it, but it still exists. I chose, let's say, to do the mitzvah, but there's still an opinion somewhere out there that says not to do the mitzvah. That's not the ultimate peace, right? So this chapter 4 gives us a deeper understanding in it that when we think about Yechida being the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, Mesiras Nefesh being about bittul, here we see what real shalom means, what it really looks like, and we understand what it means that there's no opposition to Yechida. Here there's no choice. There's simply one reality, and that's God. Right? So it's not that reality is so real and so powerful that it overwhelms anything else. There is nothing else. There is only this. Okay. Chapter 5. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So far, it's a little better than last
No, it makes sense. I understand it. I understand, like, to say a higher level, like a higher source would be where there is no opposition. There's no shadow of a shadow. There's only God. But to say that the higher Mesiras Nefesh is when you're not actually choosing to have self-sacrifice, that's a little...
Okay, I understand. So it's not about the equation. It shouldn't be your choice.
Don't call it a higher Mesiras Nefesh.
Right. So the truth is, that I think I understand what you're saying. The truth is that if you choose Mesiras Nefesh, that's the greatest that a human being can reach. You want to talk about what's the maximum, what's the highest level of humanity. Right? Where is humanity at its ultimate peak, at its best? When you're willing to even give your very self for something else. But the shortcoming where Chassidus opens our eyes to something totally beyond is that there's a possibility to reach even beyond that. The highest human being can reach is more of himself. Is self, even altruism, in a sense, is still about self-actualization on the highest level. So you're doing it for the most noble cause, the greatest thing, it's the greatest sacrifice. And yes, that is a very high level. We're not trying to disparage that level. What we're saying is that level comes with a limitation, which is that it's still about me. I haven't been able to rise outside of myself. The ultimate is to be able to transcend the human condition, to reach beyond.
Then
what's
we
reaching
be
beyond?
angels.
Exactly. We are talking. I mean, it's all people. It's not there, right?
Yeah, we see that people do. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna physically reach that if you're dealing with a physical.
But what?
Yeah.
Right, but again, what's the highest a person can reach is beyond human.
Is
To be able,
be a malach.
nothing. What's interesting is that it's unique. That it's something that's unique about the human being that you actually don't find in any other creation. An animal just wants to be an animal, right? It's only human beings that are uncomfortable being human beings. We want to try new hard. We want to always test our limits, go beyond our limits. That's a human being at his best is a human being trying to reach beyond his limitation, right? But even as a human being tries to reach beyond his limitation, and even if he successfully does, it's still within the human experience. Right? So even giving your life, which is in a sense transcending the human condition, even that, if I made that choice, it still comes from me. It's still about me. So what is the real ultimate idea of transcending the human condition is to be beyond human, which is to do something that's not about me at all. to be completely beyond, outside of myself. To just be, to do something only because of God's reality, not my reality.
I understand.
Okay. Chapter 5. So what we said now is based on the end of the Maimer of the Mittel Rebbe. The Mittel Rebbe basically says that where do we find real shalom, real peace, is on the level of Yechida. The Ava, related back to davening, and the Ava of B'chol Maidecha. Right? This is the third level of love. That's where we find the ultimate peace. The thing is that in the beginning of the Maimer, is a long, the Mittel Rebbe's Maimer, it's a very long Maimer. In the beginning of the Maimer, the Mittel Rebbe says that even on the level of Chaya, it's also shalom, it's also peace. So now that we made such a convincing argument to show why Chaya is not real peace, that there's still an enemy, so then how did he make that argument to begin with? Right? Sometimes the answer is so good that you don't understand how there was even a question. So now we have to understand what were we originally thinking, right? Okay. So but what in the Mittel Rebbe's, in the beginning of the Maimer, it wasn't a question or it wasn't a perspective that then changes. It was a perspective that remains valid. So we have to reconcile this. How does that go? So let's see the question. This is like this. Chapter 5. In the beginning of the Maimer of the Mittel Rebbe, that our Maimer is based on, the Maimer of Padav Shalom and Shari Truva. So there he says that really war is when we're talking about the godly soul battling the animal soul. And where does that take place? In the levels of Naran, the three levels of the soul that are enclosed in the body. But when we're talking about the transcendent levels, both Chaya and Yechida, there's no war. Right? It's just as he moves on in the Maimer and he continues to develop the ideas, the Mittel Rebbe then says that if you want to take it a step deeper, that Chaya is also Mulchama, but then Yashom will be Chid and peace is in the level of Yechid. So what is this? How do we understand that initial level? Remember we talked about right in the beginning of today's class, that we can divide Naran and Chaya Yechida, the five levels of the soul can be divided two ways. We divide them one way is Naran, the levels that are enclosed within the body, and then there's the Makifim, the transcendent, which is Chaya Yechida. Or we can divide them, Naran Chaya, right? Levels of Naran and Chaya, the first four levels, and then Yechida is its own category. So what we were just explaining is how we would divide them in that way. Naran and Chaya, and then Yechida. But what about the division of Naran as one, and Chaya Yechida as a second? You got the question? So that's what we're going to explain now. This is similar to what Hashem says to David, King David. When he wanted to build the Beis Hamikdash, that you spilled a lot of blood. David was a fierce warrior who led the Jewish people in a lot of battles. He was victorious, but he led a lot of wars, and there was a lot of blood that he spilled. The verse continues. So therefore, Hashem says to David, David desires to build a Beis Hamikdash. Hashem says, since you spilled a lot of blood, so therefore you're not going to build the house for me. You're not building the temple. But the verse continues. Ben hu yish hu yivne bayis lishmi. Hashem promises David, I know you want to build it, but you can't because down the Reb Shafachta you spilled a lot of blood, but you'll have a child who will be a man of peace, and he will build the Beis Hamikdash. Right? So, and what happened? We find that David Taka doesn't build the Beis Hamikdash. Who builds the Beis Hamikdash? Shlomo HaMelech, David's successor, his son, King Solomon, builds the Beis Hamikdash. Nevertheless, we know that Tavnis Hamikdash Nasa Yidei David, Miyad Hashem Alai Hiskil. We know the pasuk says that David drew up the plans for the Beis Hamikdash. He made the blueprints. And we find that David gives Shlomo all the blueprints. So it's not that Shlomo himself conceives of it from beginning to end. Shlomo HaMelech is the one who built the Beis Hamikdash. But who's the one who wrote and who made the blueprints, the plans for the Beis Hamikdash? That was David. So we have to understand the key when Beis Hamikdash Kashim Menucha v'Shom Davke. We need to understand that since the Beis Hamikdash is connected with peace, with rest and peace. So Shalachi Nemar David Leisim Nebayis Shmiki Ishbulcham Isata, and which is why Hashem tells David, you're not going to build it because you're a man of war. So if that's the case, if David can't build the Beis Hamikdash because he's a man of war, then how is it that he makes the blueprints? He's the one who sets the parameters of the Beis Hamikdash. How is he the designer of it if he's a man of war? So you can make it or not. That's the question. How are we doing on time? We have a few
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. So we can explain this. Because Shratza David in Beis Hamikdash and Mikol Shchem, Kishaychen is the Tavnis V'chulu, V'yidav B'matzav Shal Menucha. So the Rebbe explains like this: why is it that David was able to make the plans for the Beis Hamikdash? It's because which basically is the beginning stages of building. First step to build is to make the plans. So in a sense, he was involved. How is it that he was involved? It's because when David wanted to, in parentheses, it says when he wanted to build it, and certainly when he actually prepared the blueprints. Both of these, right? So both of these situations, David was then already at rest. It was already after his battles. The pasuk says that it was at the time when David, his enemies were vanquished, and he had some quiet and some rest from his enemies. So that's when David desired to, and actually went ahead and started to make the diagrams of the Beis Hamikdash. But nevertheless, even though David was already, when this whole thing happens with Hashem, where David says, I want to build a Beis Hamikdash, and Hashem says, you can't because you're a man of war. But we're saying that happened when he was already not at war. Right? So that what's going on? His peace is because of the wars that he waged. He won all his wars. He was victorious, and now the peace comes because of the war. So therefore, that's why that Shlomo wasn't the one who was able to build the Beis Hamikdash. I'm sorry, David wasn't the one to build it, because even though he had peace, but he had peace that came from war. Where Shlomo was a man whose peace didn't come from war. It was menucha be'etzem. It was true rest. Yeah, Shlomo, so we can say, so we can say, the Rebbe says now, relating it back to the Maimer, that when we talk about the idea of peace that comes from the level of Chaya, so we're talking about a level of rest, in a sense, and that, so there's no battle. So where we're talking about that would be similar to the rest that David HaMelech experienced, the rest that came from battle, but not the truest peace. In other words, we're making a distinction between the levels of peace. There's a level of peace that comes as a result of war, as David had, that he was able to now make plans for the Beis Hamikdash because he was at peace. But he was limited only to that because his peace wasn't the ultimate peace. It was a peace that came from war. Whereas Shlomo HaMelech, there was only peace. It wasn't peace that came from war. It was menucha be'etzem. Right? So relating it back there. So right, again, let's read that again. Shlomo HaDezeh shemuvur ba'mayim b'tchilas inyan shegam b'bchinas chai lo yishayach milchama derech hamenucha David la'achashim tzipam milchama. That on the level of Chai, you could say that it's peace, that there's no war. But what kind of peace is it? It's a peace that's similar to David HaMelech's peace, the peace that came as a result of war. The b'chinas naran shemislap shemaguf v'nefesh ba'amis, kivin shepulis nefesh alikis v'nefesh ba'amis, hibiderech yislap shemaguf v'nefesh ba'amis ha'sagah shelo hibetoiv d'dvarim gashmim, v'nefesh alikis misasekes im olavar lo ha'toiv d'alikos ha'reizim shom l'chama mamish. Because when we're talking about the levels of Naran, the first three levels of the Neshama, so how do those levels, the levels of the Neshama that are invested in the body, how do they affect the person? How do they affect your animal soul? They affect it because they have to engage in it. As we said, you need to speak the language of your Nefesh Bahamis. Your Nefesh Bahamis, your animal soul wants certain things, and we have to explain to it in language it understands why godliness is what it should want. So that we call literal, actual war. Literal war. It's a literal internal war. It's an internal struggle. Because you need to think about what your animal soul wants, and you need to speak in a language that you can understand. So that's a battle where the Nefesh Bahamis says one thing, I want this because of X, and you have to counter and say, no, you should want this because of Y, and that's how you go back and forth. That's actual. So, but whereas when we talk about the level of Chaya, so you're talking about an intense love, this intense desire for Hashem. So here, the intensity of your desire for God overwhelms the animal soul. So it's not that you're negotiating with it. It's not like you're discussing with it and you're trying to convince it of anything. You've simply overpowered it. That already is not called war. That's already called menucha. That's called peace. Right? You still have some more time?
A minute.
I feel like we're rushing through. Okay, so we'll continue this thought from Mr. Shem the next class.